coming, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to learn today how to make Flaounas, which are what we call a traditional Cypriot pastry made at mainly at Easter time. They're a cheese pastry, kind of like a cheese bread wrapped in pastry, and everybody has their own version of Flaounas that they make. This is our family's recipe that we've been making for decades really, and it's an evolution of a recipe that's come from Cyprus, and we've adapted it to the ingredients that you can find here in Australia, to the cheeses that you can find here, and to the milk and everything. So probably what's really central to a Flaouna recipe is the cheese mix. We've got our own cheese mix that we use, and just to explain how we prepare the cheese and the cheese mix, I'll give to my mother.
Okay, can anything just mention it? With the cheese, it's a good idea when you're doing it. Our combination is Kefalograviera, halloumi, Millet Romano cheese, cheddar cheese, and another tasty one, good tasty. You have to grate it 4 days before, so that because when we came from Cyprus, our cheeses were hard, and when we came to Australia, some of them were soft, like the cheddar cheeses. So Mum had to find a way to dry them, and the way she used to do it is she dried it, she mixed them all up and put it open like that without glare into the fridge for 4 days. That, and then tossing it every day so that it dries it up. If you don't do that process, and it's very important, is that you find that these would be too moist and it will need too much flour. The more flour you put into it, the less flavor. So there's a balance, but if you put too little flour, then it goes flat, just like your cheese toasting. You know, cheese goes flat. So you need the flour to make it rise, and you need it for the yeast. And we put semolina as well because it just absorbs a little bit more of the moisture, which helps. So you need flavor, a balance of flour to cheese. Όταν ρίξεις τα τυριά, επειδή στην Κύπρο τα τυριά ήταν πιο σκληρά, εδώ βρήκαμε μερικά από τα τυριά να είναι λίγο μαλακά. Και έτσι η μάμα μου και, I should say, η μαμά μου, η Παναγιώτα, και η θεία Λούση μαζί δουλεύανε και το κάνανε από την αρχή αυτό. Το τρίβεις 4 ημέρες πριν, γιατί στην Κύπρο το τυρί ήταν σκληρό. Και εδώ, αν τα τυριά σου είναι λίγο μαλακά, το τρίβεις, το βάζεις μέσα, να κάνεις mix together και ανακατεύεις και μετά το βάζεις μέσα στη φρίζα, όχι στη φρίζα, στο ψυγείο για 4 ημέρες. Κάθε μέρα το ανακατεύεις και το βάζεις μέσα και με αυτόν τον τρόπο το ξεραίνεις. Είναι πολύ βασικό αυτό η μέθοδος, γιατί εάν δεν το κάνεις έτσι θα πάρει πολύ αλεύρι και το πολύ αλεύρι θα πάρει από την γεύση του τυριού. Και έτσι πρέπει να το ξηραίνεις μέσα στη fridge. Αυτό βρήκανε η μαμά και η θεία Λούση να το κάνουν. Και ακόμη ένα πράγμα, αφού είμαι εδώ, το αλεύρι. Αυτό το special white, και αυτό που είναι αυτή η μάρκα είναι το πιο καλό, γιατί το pastry μου είναι λίγο layered και λίγο, my flour is a little bit layered and crunchy. So this is the best flour for it, and you can get it from the Greek delis. And most of the cheeses you can find at the Greek delis too. Thank you.
And the recipe will be online. We use a food processor to grate the cheese, so we used to do it by hand, but now we can use a food processor.
Now with the food processor you take these out, but somebody should show me because I've already know how to use it. You put the other stem in, and this one you can have as fine And if you turn it over, it's a course. You use the fine, not the course. You put it in there, you put that on top, and it's the quickest way to do your cheese. That way you get the idea. That is so quickly compared to grating it fine.
Thank you. So, we've pre-grated our cheese mix. And the steps from here are very simple. So we're just going to turn this into a very cheesy bread, if you like. So we're going to add the semolina, add the flour, and put it to the side to rest. And we normally let it to rise. We normally let it rise overnight. So we prepared one earlier. But first of all, what we do is we've got some milk, about a third of a cup of milk. So the portions we have today are to make roughly 40 Flaounas. And the portions today are half of that, is that right? So about 20?
Yeah.
So about 20 Flaounas. So you can scale this up or down. Normally we make 100, and it takes all day. These portions are for about 20 Flaounas. So a third of a cup of milk warmed up, we've already warmed this up. And to the milk, we add a teaspoon of sugar. And just stir that around. Now you want the milk to be warm, so sort of warm to touch, not hot, because we're going to add the yeast to it, and we just want to keep the yeast alive. So we're going to add our yeast to the milk. And continue to stir that around. Is there a teaspoon? Yeah, then we'll put the flour into the cheese mix. I'll just leave this to the side. Add some mekhapi, half a teaspoon of mekhapi. And a quarter of a teaspoon of vanilla powder.
The recipe for this will be online, so don't worry too much about keeping stuff. And this is the filling that we're making. We're making two parts. This is the filling, and then we're going to make the pastry, and then we'll show you how we'll put it together. So, yeah, this is the cheese filling.
Okay. So that's our yeast and milk mix. So now we'll prepare the cheese. Add the semolina to the cheese, a little bit at a time, and work it into the cheese. You want to really get a nice even mix, and you don't want the cheese to be too glowy. You can do the flour. So work it in. Yep. And then add flour just a little bit at a time, not the whole amount, because what we want to do is we want to check the consistency of the cheese. If you put too much flour, it takes away from the flavour of the cheese. If you don't put enough, it doesn't hold itself up and becomes melted cheese sandwich. Self-raising flour is what we're using.
So how do you know when it's ready?
Well, there's a little test that you can do. Get some in your hand, make a little ball, and then see how easily that falls apart. So that doesn't fall apart at all at the moment, so that's still too close. A little bit more flour. Work it into the cheese. There's no machine that can do this one for you. So we'll just move it over. Alright, try again. It's starting to fall apart. It's not too bad, but it's not well mixed. So just a little bit more. Not too much more. Work it in. All right. Try some in your hand. Now I've got my opinions, but usually when we do it, everyone has an opinion on whether or not it's ready. So I think this is getting pretty close, but I'm going to get Flaouna to check. And then finally, the project manager will check.
It doesn't matter if you do more, does it?
More flour.
No, if you squeeze it more.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
No, squeeze it. Crumble. Does it crumble?
Maybe a little.
Looking at the species that natives in Dubai is secret.
Secret, yeah.
Mixero salarica.
Yeah, I think that's good. You want to check it?
Trust us.
No, it's okay. Yeah, trust you.
Yep, trust you. Okay.
How much is left over?
How much flour?
Flour.
Oh, there's not much left over. There's like a tiny bit.
Yeah,
Just put it all
like
in.
all.
So the recipe's good.
The rest of you go right.
Alright.
Cool. So we've also pre-beaten about 5 eggs. So the consistency of the eggs, it's pretty well beaten. You want it to be pretty fluffy. You want these Flaounas to be fluffy. So that's 5 eggs. We've kept 1 egg to the side just in case when we add it to the cheese, it doesn't quite feel right. Just add more egg. So we've got this, we've got our pre-made little yeast and milk mixture. Add that to the little whisk. So I'm just going to fold it in as we go. Very easy. And now, going to add it to the cheese mix, but first just make a little hole in the cheese mix. And just pour it all in. Okay, so a lot there.
It'll reduce.
All right. So, take it away. So while that's mixing, we'll prepare the pastry. So what we'll do is once that's all mixed, what we'll normally do is cover it up and leave it overnight to rise. And it's normally prepared earlier. We wrap it in a blanket so it's warm. So it rises quite a bit. That's probably twice the size that it was last night. And it's nice and firm. Looks a little bit like pastry and it's quite soft and fluffy. So, do you can sit this here?
Okay.
Okay. So the next morning, what you do is you need to, we call it waking it up with some baking powder. So, to wake it up. So just a little bit of milk, a little bit of baking powder.
So even in our hot summers, you're leaving that out overnight.
Yeah, because it's good yeast.
And in May or late April when Easter is, it's actually quite cold.
You do it early in the morning though, so you wake up really early, you do this, then you do the pastry, then you have a little coffee break, and then...
Actually, one thing I forgot to mention is we try to keep everything at room temperature, all the ingredients, just to keep the yeast alive so it doesn't get too cold. So the eggs, the milk, warm obviously. Alright, so that's started to froth up a little bit now. You can't see it, but the milk's started to froth up. pour that across the top of your egg mixture from the day before. There's an egg on standby just in case it's not the right consistency, and just work it in. Okay, this is the time also, maybe I should have done it before. We add your sultana and there's got some chopped up mint already. You basically add it to taste.
Has to be fresh mint.
Yeah, no powder, no dry
Because it changes in flavour.
Some sultanas.
I've got a question here.
Yes.
Can you have it without sultanas?
You can definitely have it without sultanas. I like sultanas, so I'm adding sultanas.
Actually, every time we make it, we have to take out about half and have no sultanas for those who don't want sultanas.
No sultanas, no flowers.
Yes.
Take out. That's right.
And again, you just add it to taste. There's no particular portions. I think maybe 3 or 4 sultanas per Flaouna is a good amount of sultanas. Work that in. And that's basically good to go now. So, get a mixture with mint, cheese. What do you think, Manuel? Is it too sticky?
Mum has to check.
No, if you put milk, it'll make it more runny. Do you want it more runny, or does it need?
Definitely
Is it too stiff? Yani πολύ σκληρό.
Okay.
It's a bit too sticky and thick, sort of stodgy.
And the other thing is that you need an egg, so we'll have an egg. Work that in as well. The other will just take the mixture around so you can see it.
It was 5 and that's one side, yeah. So one side for the morning. I'm happy myself, but yeah, we can fill on with goes in the middle and then put it through the camera.
Yeah.
Can you see? This is the mixture.
Beautiful stand.
Okay. So you prepare the cheese the night before. So
And skivasi so that it doesn't dry out.
cover it up, cover it in a blanket, and put it to the side overnight. The cheese you've prepared already 3 days before.
You work it up.
No, this is for wrapped up one.
Just made.
So this is the one we just made, which just doesn't have the sultanas or the mint or anything. This is the one that you leave overnight to
Tea towel on top.
tea towel on top and then a blanket. Wrap it up and go to bed.
Leave it overnight.
Okay, so you're woken up bright and early in the morning, you're making flowers because you're making 100 you need all day. So,
4 days.
and you start the process 4 days ago. And invite all your friends and cousins and relatives and everyone can help. And we're going to make the pastry because the pastry needs maybe an hour to rise before you can start using it. You can use it straight away, but it rises throughout the day, probably about over 4 hours. So to make the pastry, start off with pot, and to your pot you add 30 grams of unsalted butter and 40 grams of salted butter, a bit of a cup of sugar. Yeah. And So here we have 700 mils of milk. Put half of it in the pot to melt the butter, roughly half. Would you mind heating that up for us? So that's to melt the butter, and then what we'll do is put the rest of the milk in to bring it back to a warm temperature, and we'll mix it with the yeast again. So that will be our rising agent then for the flour, for the pastry. Plain flour we're using this time, not self-raising flour. And then you prepare your mastica, because we're going to put mastica into the mixture as well. So mastica, you can get it in little crystals and little granules. I'll get a little vial of it. Thank you very much. So it comes in little white crystals. You can get it powdered already, but we use crystals. Put a quarter of a teaspoon in. It can make it taste amazing, but if you put too much, it makes it taste very bitter. So just be careful with that. Let's just put.
Because it's going to flour in it.
Yep. So I'll just put one crystal in, more than a pestle, and then just a touch of flour because it's really gummy. You want some flour just so it actually breaks up, and then just break it up. It shouldn't take long. So basically what you get is flour that's flavoured with mastica. And then you can see. Break it up into it. See? Alright, so we want a quarter of a teaspoon of that. We've got a bit more than a quarter of a teaspoon in here, but we want to use a quarter of a teaspoon. How's it going into the mix? I just said you can handle that milk to that. To this you just add the rest of your cold milk. Sort of check the temperature as you go. It's probably about right. Some yeast. So a quarter of a tablespoon of dry yeast. Mix that in. It takes a while to dissolve, so just until you sort of can't see too many bits and pieces in there and grains. But when you start kneading it, it'll work its way through, it'll dissolve. So add a quarter of a teaspoon of nectar. Quarter of a teaspoon of mastica.
Yeah.
I think it's ground cherry seeds. Ecliptic they call it.
It's very
Yeah. So the Maclevi, the sticker into the warm milk with the yeast, mix it around. To the milk. Into a big bowl, we're going to have flour. Add the rest of the milk. And then progressively add 1 kilo of flour. So put the rest of the milk in there, put in that levy, some oil as well, add some oil to the mixture, 1/4 cup of sunflower oil. Like this. And then as you go, start adding the flour. We've allowed 1 kilo, it might take more, it might take less, just until the pastry is about right. It's not. It's starting to get thick. So it's kind of like a pancake batter at the moment. That's enough for now. It's still far too wet, but I'm just mixing it in.
When it gets too thick, then you just start using your hands, but you'll see.
More. That's enough. This will just come onto the bench. Yeah. Okay. So there is ready. Let's do it. So it's nice and fluffy. Feels good. That's definitely ready to go on the bench. Because it's more than a kilo of flour.
No, like, it's a kilo of pastry.
A bit more. It's a bit right.
You can tag team it with someone with strong arms if you want.
So much easier making 1 kilo.
Yeah, we usually do 100 and it takes us forever. Around a kilo.
8 kilos. Is that okay? Is that ready? Okay. Can I get the flour?
I'm getting the to stop.
Because it absorbs them.
It's going to be a lot softer than bread though. So once it's really well mixed, you're going to leave it for a couple of minutes and then do it again, or knead it again. It just gives it time to brew, I think that's the word. It's just easier to knead it that way. So leave it for a couple of minutes, and then we made one earlier, so where's Chris? He's going to go get it. Is that where he is? Okay.
So that was prepared about an hour ago.
You can leave it longer if you want to, but it's going to rise, once you assemble them, they're going to rise a little bit before you put them in the oven anyway, so. Okay, so now we're going to show you how to put them together. So we've got the pastry, which we're going to roll out and cut circles out of. So we're going to get a plate and cut circles out of them, and then we'll get the filling, a couple of tablespoons of filling. We'll show you how much, and then how we fold it. Some people make triangles, some people make squares, whatever you want. And sometimes we, like the ones without sultanas, we might make them squares. And no one gets upset, but that's one thing you can do. And then we've got the sesame seed that we roll it in, or roll the pastry in before we put the filling. And so with the sesame seeds, you have to prepare them a little bit before you roll them, or like put them on the bread, because otherwise they'll just fall off. So to stop them falling off, there's a special trick. You have to boil them, and as soon as it starts to boil, so just put some water in a big katsarora, so a big pan or big pot, put it on the stove and let it boil with the sesame in it. And once it just starts to boil, you put a bit of baking powder in there as well, and let it boil for another minute, for another 1 minute, and then take it off and rinse it. And then they'll stick to your bread and they won't fall off. So that's a nice little tip. That's what we did to this. It's already pre-done. And we're going to add some filigani sauce, so that's aniseed.
Aniseed?
Yeah, aniseed seeds. And
Filigani
sauce. Yep, and also some mavroboko. So do you guys want to know what this is? It's like Nigella seeds, I think is the English word for that. And it's like when you buy Turkish bread at Coles and it's got those little black seeds on it, they look like sesame seeds, but they're just kind of sharp looking and they're peppery. That's what they are. And it makes a big difference to the flavour. So have it. And we put that in the sesame, so we mix the gliganiso and the malgroboko, and with the sesame. And then it's ready. Okay, so in this,
buy that from the supermarket, or do you have to get it from a specialty
you
shop?
can buy it from the supermarket, but they usually don't have it. Usually you have to go to a deli, a Greek deli, or sometimes continental delis, because I think the middle, at least if it's any easier to. My jealousy. Oh, in Greek it's magrogoko. Magrogoko. But that's, I think, Cypriot. No, that's Greek as well. Yeah. Magrogoko. Ogokos in Magros. Okay.
Because I like uncomfortable lot.
You can try them. They're like peppery. They're got good flavor. It's kind of sweet and peppery at the same time. It looks like sesame seed, but it doesn't taste like one. Okay, so this is when it's basically ready. It's very soft, so it's like a kilo sort of it's a lot softer than bread. And just leave it, cover it, put it to the side, go have a coffee, and then when you're ready to do it all, one time. Cover it so that it doesn't dry out.
So it comes time to assemble. Basically, you've got your dough that you've prepared, which has started to rise, and will continue to rise throughout the whole day. You put that to one side. You get your filling that you prepared earlier in the day, which you've woken up with the baking powder. Filling that you prepared a bit earlier.
And your sesame. And make it mostly sesame, just a few of those other spices. And then you cover it, otherwise it dries and it won't stick very nicely. Or you can just cover the bowl.
A little bit of pastry. Then rip it in. I like to use my hand, but you can use a rolling pin. I really try to make it really thin because it continues to expand in cooking as well, and then the ratio of pastry and filling doesn't really work. So you've got to get it really, really thin. Really thin is almost ready to split, to crack. Which I've already done almost. Thinner than what you think will work. Right. Measuring plate, roughly a saucer. So it'll stretch as you assemble it. And it's important to now put the sesame seed. Alright, dip it in. Nicely coated with sesame, nigella, and some aniseed. Pull back down, upside down, pat it down a bit. With the sesame seed down. And then portion the filling. A heaped tablespoon. Because again, the filling out of your Flaouna. And then just assemble it into a a neat triangle. Yes. Down the sides.
Chairman, how do a square as well?
I got the first one right. You can do a square as well.
You have to make sure that you leave it a little bit open in the top so that you can see the filling, but not too open, because otherwise when it rises it'll just burst and look funny. But if you want it to look pretty, then only have a little bit of filling showing on the top.
Actually, normally we get enough pastry to make 3 or 4 cutouts from the one roll.
Echte Master vegan recipe.
There's no-
There's no vegan recipe yet, but now you can buy bio halloumi and you can even get feta. You can, yeah, there is vegan cheeses that you could try, but then with that, yeah.
So even for a square Flaouna, you still use a circle cutout?
Yes, question.
Kind of cheese is that?
Okay, so what kind of cheese is this? We've got G.O.P Graviera, and
No, that's sesame seed.
no, this one's sesame seed. This?
Ah,
Yeah,
that's
cheese.
sesame,
Yeah.
there's no cheese there.
No, the cheese is all in the filling. Yeah. And that's the cheeses that we said at the start. Some of them are sharp flavour, some of them are cheesy, melty halloumi, which is probably what they used to use mostly. You can get a special Flaouna cheese, but is that any good?
Not in Australia. In Cyprus, yes, but in Australia it's a little bit too, it hasn't got any flavour, enough flavour.
So the Flaouna cheese that you can get in Australia, some people, it depends on your taste really. Some people like it, other people find that there's not enough flavour in it. So there's a special cheese called Flaouna cheese that you can buy from the delis, but you can use it if you like it, but it's a little bit mild in flavour. So if you want it to be really cheesy, which is, I guess, that's what we like.
I like to see how you like it.
Yeah.
Just for sure.
So to make a square, you just fold it in 4. That's what the stretch a bit more.
Macchina non me la vai.
Yeah, no.
So it won't.
So, say in Greek.
Macchina, ne?
Naglini alanamin
Push down the
akuba. Yeah.
And
And you have to press down the sides, otherwise it'll just open when it.
yeah, when it's cooking.
And to pin down the whole fold along the seams, you can put little prick marks with the scork, and it presses it down a bit so it doesn't close open.
Okay.
All right, so I'll bring it round. Okay, so we've got squares, triangle.
You can make them really big if you want, if you don't have time, or you want people to sit there. Some people make them small size. Hang on, camera. You see? This, we've got a square here, a triangle. Or you can make your own shape, some people make it round.
So once they're cooked, if you like, you have the opportunity. As far as I know, they taste great out of the freezer. But if somebody wants to try them, you can taste test them, and you can add more cheese to get the flavour right. If it's a little bit too mild or if it's a little bit too strong, you can add cheeses after the fact. It doesn't matter. You can add cheeses to be pre-mixed to change the flavour. So
I have a question. How long do you cook them for?
won't be a cook it for me.
Okay, well, you have to wait until these rise. So you'll see like in about 20 minutes, half an hour, just depending on how hot it is or how warm it is. They'll, I don't know, nearly a third get bigger. Oh, like you'll see, they'll be full screwed up and just bigger. And then we'll show you. And then you cook them for around about 20 minutes in 180, is it? 180 degrees. We usually do like one test batch, make sure they're okay. And then if there's anyone that can't miss Pepsi for any reason, then they can do the tasting stuff. And then they can tell you if the cheese mix is okay, and you can add different if you need to. When you're putting the filling in as well, just make sure that if you're making ones with sultanas, that you get sultanas in there, otherwise it will be very upset. And try it like that it's mixed well as well. So that you get maybe like, I would say one sultana with every bite is probably a good ratio, but everyone has different tastes. Some people like a lot of sultanas, some people even put cinnamon in there, so like different recipes, different people, different families, whatever you're used to, but this is traditional to the mum's village anyway. Of Bachman.
Yeah, it's from Lemisor, but a lot of people use that. Lemisor, Papos, no, Destronia láχνη διαφορετικό. Μερικές βάζουν record cheese instead of normal cheese, αλλά δεν βάζουμε εμείς. Εμείς βάζουμε σκληρά.
Πότε τις φτιάχνει τις φλάουνες?
Τις φλάουνες
Would you like to make some flowers?
Ποια περίοδο, το καλοκαίρι ήταν?
a question.
Okay, question time. If anyone has questions, go.
Πότε φτιάχνουμε τις φλάουνες, πότε είναι η παράδοση? Το καλοκαίρι, το Πάσχα, τα Χριστούγεννα, πότε?
Πάσχα, of course.
Αν είναι Πασχαρινό δηλαδή, όπως στην άλλη Ελλάδα, στην υπόλοιπη Ελλάδα φτιάχνουμε τα τσουρέκια, στην Κύπρο φτιάχνουμε φλαούνες. Και πότε τις φτιάχνουμε, το Μεγάλο Σάββατο, τη Μεγάλη Πέμπτη, πότε? Ή το φτιάχνουμε πολύ νωρίς και τα φυλάνε?
Well, it depends back in the day. When they didn't have, well, no, really, when did they used to make them? The day before?
Όχι.
The day of.
No, μία... Κρατάνε έξω.
Και πότε τις φυλάνε, άμα τις φτιάξουμε?
You can make them a few weeks in advance, which is what we do. We usually pick one of the public holidays and before Easter, make them and then cook them, and then we can freeze them. You can freeze them and they keep a whole year if you want. But they have to be cooked. So if you cook them once they're cold.
Yes.
What's that?
You have to keep them in the fridge when you make them a week before, for instance.
If you make them a week before, it's better to freeze them. It's better to freeze them, and then you can either heat them up in the oven, so like leave them out and let them defrost, and then you can either heat them up in the oven to make them a bit crispy again on the outside, or you can put it in the microwave.
Can you put them in the freezer and freeze them without cooking them first?
That's a good question. Someone did try that, and I don't know if it's worked yet because they're going to cook them from the freezer, uncooked, on Easter Day. So I don't know, but we'll see. We'll find out. We've never done it that way, but there is an experiment going on. As far as I know.
I see you've used special white flour. Can you use any other type?
We've used 00 flour before. Last year, it didn't work out so well, so we've stuck to the special white flour.
It's the best for the crunchiness and also the texture of the flours. Don't use pizza flour because it goes too stretchy. And I didn't think it was that bad. Last year we had to use pizza flour because that's all there was. But use special
where do you
white.
get that one from? Is that
The deli?
like from the
Greek deli? Yeah. But you can, I don't know if you can get it from the supermarket. No, you can't, sorry.
That particular brand is just right.
It looks like it's similar to 0 flour. So it's high protein.
High protein,
Very refined.
So like the baker's flour?
It's bread and pasta. It's
Bread and,
Okay.
do you want to get the eggs ready to go on top?
So the final step, just before they go into the oven, is you glaze them with some egg. So it's very simple egg glaze, eggs. and sugar. And what tablespoon of sugar?
You
put sugar on them if they're savoury. Was there savoury on there?
Oh, there's sugar in them.
There's sugar in
Yeah,
them.
so they're sweet and savoury because of the sultanas as well. So, yeah, we put the sugar because it makes it shiny. Yeah? And brown.
And the sugar in the pastry, there's a little bit of sugar in the pastry, a little bit of sugar in the mixture as well. A little bit of vanilla, so they're savoury, but there's a bit of sweet to them as well. Take a mix. And we'll just glaze them up. Are these ready for glazing yet? Not yet.
I think we have some that are in the oven or going to be in the oven soon, so we can show you. No?
No, we didn't do it.
Okay. We'll post a photo of them when they're ready as
I
well.
think, yeah, we'll do them here, but for the live stream, we'll post a photo of the finished product because they're 20 minutes away.
Anything else?
Yeah, it's just a bit of advice. Oh, okay. Can I just go past? I guess I had to pass on my skill that my mum taught me, and her mother, Yaya Maritza, and her mother, Yaya Theophani. So I passed it on to them, but what you find is sometimes you can't find the cheeses, or they stopped making them. In 2011, they stopped making Roma Mulli, and that used to be the cheese that all the Cypriots used to use. And it was made in Queensland, but they've stopped manufacturing. So we would start saying, oh, what do we do now? So what you have to always remember, and don't panic, in the cheese mixture, to get it right, you need 2 strong cheeses, but not too much of it. I used Kefalo Graviera, that's a strong cheese, and I used Mileo Romano cheese. A little bit more. And then you use the milder cheeses to water it down. So it's not and halloumi, depends. Sometimes some halloumi doesn't have too much salt, some prefer the saltiest halloumi. I use the medium one, where it's not too salty and not too like without salt.
But you can soak the salty one if you
Yeah. You don't like the mixture, something went wrong. Okay, does it need a bite? If it needs a bite, you use Mileo Romano cheese or Kefalo Graviera. That's to put extra bite into it. If you put too much bite into it and somebody tastes it and then of course you don't taste it, but if there's someone in the family that can taste it and tell you, and if it's too strong, then you use a little bit of the tasty or the cheddar cheese. And that's how you correct it. So don't be scared. Or Romano to Pecorino. But it's a personal taste. Whatever you do, not too much of the strong. But these combination with Kefalo Graviera and Romano cheese, Mileo Romano cheese, there's different Romano cheese, so make sure it's the Mileo Romano cheese. It's a really lovely flavor where most people find it good to eat. It's not too strong, it's got a bit of a bite, and that's what you want. So don't be scared to experiment. But first, I would suggest do it this way, with this amount of cheese, as in the recipe that Tony's going to put up on the internet. And then, if you, after tasting it, you say, personally, I would like a little bit more bite, then increase the Kefalo Graviera or the Mileo Romano cheese. So that's all. The balance of strong cheeses to mild cheeses that dilute the flavour of the cheese. Not too much flour, otherwise you kill the cheese flavour. But not too little either. So yeah.
And what's the best way to eat them?
Now, I freeze mine because I like it fresh. So if I'm in a hurry, I put it in the microwave oven for about maybe a minute, depending on your microwave oven, but it makes the pastry soft. So before the visitors come, I have my oven on and I put it in there for about 10 minutes to make it crunchy again. And then I serve it. That's the best way if you want to use the microwave oven. But the best way is to take it out of the freezer, put it in your oven and let it, while you're preparing your other things that you're going to have at the table, put those in first.
Or the best breakfast ever is just a Flaouna.
And a Greek coffee.
Το τρώμε στο φαγητό, με τον καφέ, σαν γλυκό, πώς το τρώμε?
Το τρώεις μόνο του, όχι με το φαγητό. Όχι. Είναι όπως το σουρέκι. Το βάζεις εκεί με το καφέ.
With a nice port?
Coffee is better. Greek coffee is perfect.
Okay. Εμείς θα βάλουμε τον καφέ λοιπόν στο
And if you are like me, I know it's not polite, I like to dip my Flaouna in the Greek coffee and then dunk. Yeah, sorry, that is really nice. But you know, it's not proper. But anyway.
We have a comment from a Cypriot lady that Holy Thursday is a traditional day in Cyprus.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much too. Does anyone know the history of this? Thank you, Sula. Thank you very much.
Another question is, what do you prick the pastry?
What do you, what, sorry?
Prick the pastry with the fork.
Oh, why? Okay, so we prick the pastry with the fork at the end on the seams of the fold, just so that it doesn't open, so just so that it sticks a bit. So it kind of squashes it down, but like don't squash it, but it keeps it intact.
One is cooking.
So you press down the sides with the base of the fork on the corners, and then you prick along the seam. Egg washing. So Chris is going to show you how to egg wash it. So just pretend that these have risen a bit, and they will rise a bit in the oven as well.
Put a generous amount.
Any questions while
You can use a gopra, is that what it's called? If you want to have like pretty edges, but because we fold them, you can't really see the edge.
Can I ask you a question? Can you make, instead of individual small Flaounas, can you make it as a bread? And then you can slice it.
I don't see a reason why you should. It's not traditional, but I guess you could. Oh wait, actually I think parts of Greece too are like that. I've seen big long ones. So they've got the filling in the middle and they make it just, you can make whatever shape you want. Because the filling is actually bready as well. Like it's got the texture of bread but it just tastes like cheese. So,
Yeah, the light will go.
Yeah.
now with the baking, it's 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, sorry, Celsius, sorry. 180 degrees Celsius. You cook it until it's a lovely brown cup. And if you have an oven that has a top and bottom heater, I prefer that because it makes it crunchier down the bottom and up the top. So that's my setting. I have the one that has an element at the top, an element down the bottom, and the fan. Let it cook for 20 minutes roughly, but go by sight more than time. You might find that if you've got an older oven, it might need to be a little bit higher, but if you've got a very hot oven, you might have to reduce it. So say, oops, it's too high. I generally do one sample and put it in, very important, and I take it out and I cook one sample first. If I see that the Flaouna has not risen and it goes a little bit flat, then automatically I take my filling and I put a little bit more flour. If and only if, when I do my first sample, the Flaouna doesn't rise as much as it should, and consequently it shows that it hasn't got enough flour, I put it in, mix it in, and then the rest of them are right.
What kind of flour do you want?
For the mixture, in here it's self-raising flour. Any kind of self-raising flour, any brand.
So we're going to cook some now, and it's going to smell amazing. We're going to try it. You want to try it? We'll try it. Even though it doesn't taste very good straight out of the oven, you have to have it on frozen ingredients. I'll just say that so that you enjoy it more if it's pizza.
It does smell amazing.
Another question, where did you get the rolling pin from?
It's the best. The best roasting. Oh, funny. It is a roasting. Oh, but like a clean. Right, there's no more questions. We'll post photos of the finished product.
Probably 15 minutes.
Αν θέλετε μπορείτε να συνεχίσετε, θα λέτε όμως κάτι να ξέρετε. Σήμερα μας και άλλη παράδοση έχετε στην Κύπρο και φτιάχνετε το Πάσχα. Πώς το κάνετε, είναι όπως και στην υπόλοιπη Ελλάδα, φτιάχνετε κάτι άλλο, τι κάνετε. Σούλα, πες μας.
Storytelling while we're cooking.
Lots of questions. One of the questions asked is, we bought one wrapped up in the blanket in the morning, and it looks something like this. Okay. This is the one, and one of the questions was, what was it that we had bought? This was a mixture like this that we made last night at about 10 o'clock. In Cyprus, we use glozini, which is sourdough starter. So we used to make the pastry and the mixture the night before, so all through the night it would rise. So that's how we still continue that tradition. So we made this mixture. It has in it κεφαλογραβιέρα τριμμένο, μετά από 4 ημέρες που το άφησα να στεγνώσει. It's got κεφαλογραβιέρα, it's got all my cheese mixtures in it. It's got the yeast, it's got the eggs, it's got the mekleti, everything that you need. Except it hasn't got the sultanas nor the meat. Now, and you do the mixture και το ετοιμάζεις το βράδυ. Το βάζεις μια πετσέτα, το κάνεις wrap up and put it in a not air conditioned room, but in a warm room και το αφήνεις πάνω στο τραπέζι σου ή στην κουζίνα σου για όλη τη νύχτα και ξυπνάς το πρωί, θα είναι έτοιμο.
Actually, the longer you leave the cheese like that as well, the flavors develop, so you get some more intense cheese flavor if you do that overnight. But if you just do it all fresh and then make it, it's nice, but not as strong.
Because we're using yeast though, επειδή χρησιμοποιούμε yeast αντιπροσύνη, what I found is by about 1 o'clock μετά από το μεσημέρι αρχίζει και αδυναμίζει. It's not strong because I'm using yeast αντιπροσύνη. Και έτσι, whatever you do, you have to start early in the morning, 6:30, 7:30, και να το κάνεις as soon as you can, πριν το μεσημέρι, καλύτερα. Γιατί αλλιώς the yeast αδυναμίζει and you can't get a full nice thing. So that's the only precaution. Αυτό το κάνεις το βράδυ Και το πρωί, όταν θα το κάνεις εσύ μόνη σου, θα κάνεις το pastry. Όταν γίνει το pastry, είσαι έτοιμη. Εμείς απλώς το κάναμε ξανά για να σας δείξουμε πώς το κάναμε. Αλλιώς, σπίτι σου, έχεις το egg mixture που το κάνεις το πρωί, το βράδυ. Το πρωί θα του βάλεις το δυόσμο, θα του βάλεις και το σουλτάνας εάν θέλεις και κάνεις το pastry σου και είσαι έτοιμη. Μην ξεχάσετε, πρέπει να βράσετε το σισάμι με το νερό, γιατί αν δεν το βράσεις για 1-2 λεπτά δεν θα χωρίσει πάνω στο pastry. Πρέπει να το βράσεις, βάζεις λίγο μετά. Αν δεν το άκουσες αυτό. Εντάξει. Το σισάμι παίρνεις μια κατσαρόλα, βάζεις νερό και βάζεις το σισάμι σου μέσα. Το βράζεις. Μόλις και αρχίσει και κουκλάει, τότε βάζεις baking powder που είναι, βάζεις λίγο baking powder. Και γιατί είναι για να το ασπρίσει λίγο. Ασπρίσει το πιο ωραία. Και το κάνεις strain, το πλένεις για να φύγει το baking powder και όλα τα άλλα πράγματα. Μετά το βάζεις σε πετσέτα. Εάν δεν το κάνεις αυτό, το σισάμι θα πέφτει από το pastry. Any other questions? The history of Flaouna, I'm sorry if anybody out there knows, let us know, because I just know that my parents and the grandparents before, from generation to generation, have passed it to my. Yeah, it's a tradition. I don't know where it started. Anyone out there who knows, please.
You can't eat on the lead up to Easter is just in the Easter.
Yeah.
Τι άλλα φτιάχνετε στο Πάσχα? Τι άλλα φτιάχνετε στο Πάσχα?
Το Πάσχα κοκκινίζουμε τα αυγά. Εάν είσαι από το ριζοκάρπασο, which is the deep part of Cyprus, you know, this is Cyprus and it's got a little blob here and a handle down there. Down there, where my husband comes from, they have something which is a red seaweed. Correct, Andrew? It's a red seaweed, and οι γυναίκες, γιατί το ριζοκάρπασο is very close to the ocean, to the Mediterranean Sea. Πηγαίνουνε, πιάνουν το seaweed και το βράζουνε και παίρνουν το χρώμα και μετά κοκκινίζουν τα αυγά τους με αυτή την ποδιά. Ξέρω μερικές που τα αυγά τα βάζουν μέσα σε κρεμμυδόφυλλα και βάζουμε πάνω φύλλο, ωραία φύλλα και χρησιμοποιούμε το stockings. Τα stockings το δένουμε μέσα στο αυγό, tight, really tight, και μετά το βάζουμε μέσα στην ποδιά και παίρνει το κόκκινο χρώμα. Όταν το βγάλουμε, το σχίζουμε, το κόβουμε το κλατσό, και μετά φεύγεις και το φύλλο από πάνω και έχεις ένα ωραίο αυγό. Εγώ μόνο κόκκινα, γιατί το κάνω για το κόκκινο.
Το έτοιμο είναι κόκκινο.
Ναι, γιατί είναι το αίμα που έχει ο Χριστός.
Και όπως λέει η παράδοση, εντάξει είμαι εδώ, και όπως λέει η παράδοση, λέει ότι είπαν σε μια γυναίκα ότι ο Χριστός αναστήθηκε και λέει δεν το πιστεύω. Λέει αναστήθηκε ο Χριστός, μα δεν το πιστεύω. Και είχε μπροστά της αυγά, λέει αν όντως αναστήθηκε τα αυγά να γίνουν κόκκινα. Εκείνη τη στιγμή τα αυγά έγιναν κόκκινα. Και από τότε έμεινε έτοιμο σε όλους να βάθουμε αυγά. Γι' αυτό τα βάθαμε.
Αυτή η γυναίκα ήταν η Αγία Μαχαλή. Ναι, κάνουμε κουλούρια και όχι, τσουρέκια είναι ελληνικά. Εδώ τα μάθαμε στην Αυστραλία τα τσουρέκια. στην Κύπρο δεν κάνουμε τσουρέκια, εκτός τώρα κάνουμε, αλλά στο χωριό μου και από αυτά τα άλλα χωριά δεν κάνουμε τσουρέκια.
If we were to use sourdough, what's the ratio in the dough and what's the ratio in the mixture?
Okay, the sourdough, the same one that you use for the rosimi. Okay, for the roast, probably a third, so 3/4 of a cup for every 4 cups of flour. So you'll just have to, I've never actually done it, but for this amount, did you use 1 kilo of flour? Okay, so probably about a cup of rosimi.
And does the rosimi will go in the cheese mixture as well?
Yes.
And how much is it?
How much flour do you put in that?
1 cup of yeast.
So instead of yeast, you use rosimi?
Yeah.
A third of a cup?
For the filling. Yeah, a third of a cup.
Of wet flour.
Of liquid. Of flour, it was half a cup.
Okay, so not that much. It doesn't actually matter because the rosimi is going to multiply and like it's going to rise it anyway. It'll take longer, use less. So I haven't actually tried it, but start with maybe 1/4 of a cup for the filling for this amount. Oh, is it? I'll figure it out and we'll put it in the recipe.
Can you tell us, on your dough, he uses the sourdough, the rosimi. Amiota, can you tell us the benefits to using rosimi to yeast? Because στην Κύπρο αυτό χρησιμοποιούσαμε και τώρα μαθαίνουν πως είναι πιο καλό και πιο υγιεινό. Γιατί it actually chews up gluten.
If you leave it for long enough, yeah. So that rosimi is like a living, well, I mean yeast is living too, but that's only 1 or 2 strains, and it's commercially used because it's faster. Whereas rosimi has good bacteria as well as good yeast, and it digests some of the wheat and some of the so it doesn't bloat you up as much, and also like you get the benefits of the good bacteria and the good yeast and everything in your body as well, so that's good too. It's just all around better. But it does give it a bit of a sour flavour, but that doesn't matter if it's cheese. I've always wanted to try it, but I've been told no. So I'll try it one day and I'll let you know. If anyone else has used it though, they can tell us. Oh yeah, and Chris does his own experimentation with the cheese. So one time he made with just goats and just sheep. Has in Cyprus, and they don't have many cows. Yes, yeah, and it was delicious.
So that's the experimental set, so any experiments?
But here in Australia, those cheeses are extremely expensive, so it might cost like $5 to $7 just for the cheese for each Flaouna, but it's worth it, it's delicious. So if you can and you want to, go for it. Because you can get these cheeses in
Cold usually.
No, get all of it there that is already cows. Yeah, so that's already one that you can
halloumi from Cyprus, because of halloumi
actually the Coles brand doesn't have any cows in it. The Coles brand. You just choose the cheese based on whatever. In our opinion, everyone's got their own taste there and cheese as well.
Έχει κεφαλογραβιέρα, halloumi, Mileo Romano, cream cheese, και tasty cheddar from Coles. I think we should get some special rewards from Coles for mentioning them but the mature strength one, because I didn't want to just mild, I wanted a little bit of a bite, so I bought the mature cheddar cheese, mature strength. Το αφήνω λίγο πιο or in a restaurant. I sindaji που έχετε να βάλουμε η συνταγή που θα βάλει ο Chinese Funny στο internet will probably make 30 to 40 φλαούνες ανάλογα πόσο μεγάλες τις θέλετε. For any teacup. So that size would make you about 40.
Αλλά τις βάλουμε μέσα.
Προτού να τις βάλουμε μέσα, πρέπει να βάλουμε...
πρέπει να βάλουμε το...
Any other questions?
I have a question now.
Yes.
What difference does it make if we use like low-fat cheeses? Does it make a difference, or
low-fat cheese?
Yeah. Does low-fat cheese taste as good?
Yeah.
Well, I think it tastes as good, then we should be okay. But
it's all about the flavour.
Yeah, I don't think you can get low-fat varieties of Flaouna and things like that. So I'm not sure if you can substitute all of them. But you could try substituting like the tasty cheese for a light tasting. It'll just change the flavour. Like, I don't think it's going to make a big difference to, I don't know, the texture. I'm not sure.
We don't know. You can experiment.
Just make them smaller, and then you don't have to worry about that. You have to let them age for 3 weeks before you can.
So what Yoda is doing here, so that you can see it on the side, is you leave all what you don't use covered up, and you just spread a little bit at a time, put a little bit of Morocco corn and aniseed on it as you like, but don't do it all together because you might not use it all. And then you can just, now if you have about this much left over, what I do is I put it in a plastic zip tie bag.
Yeah, you can freeze it.
And then I freeze it.
And then to defrost it, what do you do?
I'll put it in water and then Alright, we're just about to put the next lot in. And just before, very important, just before you put them in the oven, you glaze them. So Father over there is going to glaze them for us. Oh, they're ready.
We've got some that are just coming out of the oven. If only we could project the smell of the Okay, so it's been what, 20 minutes or 15 minutes? How long did we cook those for?
Could be about 15 minutes.
That was probably about 15 minutes, but we've got an industrial oven here, so it's 20 minutes, right? 20 minutes. And as you can see, they've risen. And it smells amazing. But as I said, they don't taste good now. Don't worry about it.
Now, can you see that they have risen? So it was the right amount of flour. They shouldn't be flatter than that. If they're flatter than that, you add more flour to your mixture before you do the rest of it. But that's a good rice.
Well, the protocol we got from the deli. Yep. But you can, I've found that sometimes at Asian, not Asian, like Indian groceries and things like that, you can get they're called Nigella seeds. Yeah. And you can get big lots of small lots. Nigella seeds. Nigella. This is the recipe. But it looks like black
I'll take one. I'll take it.
Make some Greek coffees.
Are we going to have someone taste one? Oh, okay. That lesson ends We will show you, we'll open one up to see the steam rise out of it.
That's a little bit.
Do you want someone to hold your leg? Just break it. Just break it.
There we go. Yeah.
So inside you'll see most of it is the cheesy, bready sort of mixture, and
these along so that you can see how much glaze is. There's quite a big generous amount of glaze involved.
after you glaze it, you can also put a little bit of extra seasoning on top if you want.
Oh, sorry, I've got one step. After you glaze it, you put a bit of sesame seeds just on top. Just because we like our sesame seeds. There's some that put less. Unless you're allergic.
So we had a lot of pre-made steps, but this literally takes all day.
It's pretty
You're not
generous.
making too many though. It'll just take a couple of hours.
Sorry.
It's worth it.
So, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to Viola, my sister, and to my mum, and to Paraskevi for hosting us and for asking us and inviting us to share our Flaouna recipe with everyone. So, have a good pasta.
We look forward to tasting all the
Take the same around and we'll
I have a question. Father, you have to do a fundraiser.